pays for a lot of barista machines that produces the coffee that inner city types sit around and drink and talk about the death of coal.
He seems to be saying that basically our coal exports buy our coffee machines.
Do you have a coffee machine?
I don't have a coffee machine.
Were you to buy one, would you pay for it with coal?
I wouldn't. I find coal is not a particularly good means of exchange. Like when I rock up to the shop with a big lump of coal, they don't tend to accept it.
Hi, I'm Richard Dennis.
And I'm Matt Grudnoff.
Welcome to the Spin Bin. Here at the Spin Bin, we're going to help decode all of the press conferences and interviews that the people that lead our country use to suggest that black is white, up is down, night is day, and that whatever they want to do is good for the country. Matt, what are we going to talk about today?
Well, today we're going to have a look at the National Party, and in particular, the Deputy Prime Minister, Michael McCormack, who's actually just been the Prime Minister while our PM was away.
Now, Matt, did the Deputy Prime Minister really say that coal is paying for our coffee recently?
He did in an interview, which seems bizarre to think that...
Is that how you pay for your coffee?
I don't pull out a lump of coal and pay for it regularly.
Is that how Australia pays for its coffee? Do we go overseas with some coal and get some coffee?
Not at all. And so the fact that he was claiming it seems really bizarre, but that's not the only bizarre claim, or seemingly bizarre claim, that Michael McCormack's been making. He's been talking about mice plagues being transferred to inner city places.
You're going to take the mice to the city?
Yeah, we're going to pack them up, put them in the apartments. That's exactly right.
That'll learn them.
He's been going this very strong attitude of bush versus city.
Right. So what we're going to do today is break down both the press conference that the Deputy Prime Minister gave, but also this strategy that the Nationals have of basically saying we're on the side of the bush and all of Australia's problems are caused by inner city, latte sipping, electric car driving, you name it. Socialists, probably. Certainly elites. Now, this is not an accident. Like what we're going to show you today is the carefully considered strategic choices of smart people. They might sound corny, it might sound dumb, but this is not just a carefully considered political strategy, it's a successful one. They're in government.
While it sounds incoherent and stupid,
yes, it does.
They're actually thinking that you're dumb enough to fall for this.
Are you dumb enough to fall for it, Matt?
Well, what we're going to do today is we're going to break it down so that you can see exactly what they're doing so you won't fall for it.
All right, let's roll the tape.
The G7 has labelled climate change an existential threat and recommitted to net zero emissions. Is Australia increasingly exposed on this issue?
Well, Australia's not a signatory to the G7 Plus community.
So she asked if Australia was increasingly exposed to the fact that the biggest economies in the world are moving away from coal. What did he just say?
He said they weren't part of the G7, which...
I think everyone knows we're not part of the G7.
Yeah.
All right.
G7 is the 7 biggest economies, and we are not part of that.
So the question is, are you worried about the decisions made of the G7? And he said, we're not part of the G7. All right, let's keep listening.
Okay, but we will do things based on what's right for Australia. We will do based on what's right for Australian households and factories and farms
So he'll do what's right for Australian households and factories and farms.
Yep.
So is ignoring the decisions made of the G7 good for Australian households, factories and farms?
Yeah, but also what is good for Australian households, factories and farms? Do you think that rampant climate change is good for households, factories and farms?
Poll after poll suggests not. But
particularly in the agriculture sector, changes in weather would have big effects on them.
And look, let's be clear, a lot of people work in factories and few people work in farms. They're important jobs, but most Australians don't work in factories. Most Australians don't work in farms. Maybe he doesn't care about them.
Particularly since the car industry was shut down.
Oh, didn't we used to have a car industry?
We did. Why did it shut down again?
Well, I think this government actually goaded the car industry into leaving.
They don't have to pay any more for their electricity than what they otherwise should have.
So we shouldn't pay more for our electricity than we otherwise should have. What does that mean?
Well, I think what he's trying to say is that if we want to reduce our emissions, then we have to pay more for electricity. But that seems odd since renewable energy is the cheapest form of new energy that they can possibly build.
So this guy's in coalition with the Liberals, yeah?
Yes, that's right.
And he's giving a press conference in Bathurst, New South Wales.
Rural New South Wales.
I'm pretty sure that the New South Wales Liberal Minister for Energy recently said the reason that the New South Wales Liberal government is going big on renewables is they're cheap.
Yeah, absolutely. It brings electricity prices down.
So he's standing in the state where the Liberals are saying renewables are cheaper than coal and gas, saying that if we tackle climate change, it'll make electricity dearer. I wonder if his coalition partners even listen to him.
I don't know.
Oh, we have to.
We want to make sure that we've got a manufacturing sector in Australia.
Wouldn't that be nice?
Yeah, wouldn't a manufacturing sector be nice? So this is interesting. So what he's basically alluding to, and the good thing about when you're in these press conferences, you don't ever say something outright. You kind of allude to it. And this is what he's doing here. Here's his strategy. He's basically saying, well, renewable energy and reducing emissions is bad for manufacturing. Okay, so I want to go to our first graph for today. So this is a graph of a bunch of countries, including Australia. They're sort of countries that we might want to be like. So, you know, there's countries that are similar to Australia. So we've got the UK, France, US, Spain, Italy, Japan, Germany. And this is how big their manufacturing sectors are as a proportion of their economy.
So kind of rich, developed countries, how big manufacturing is.
That's right. So in Australia, 6% of our GDP, 6% of our economy comes from the manufacturing sector.
Oh.
But that's actually quite small compared to other nations. We've actually got quite a small manufacturing sector. We can see that the UK is 10%, USA is twice us at 12%, all the way up to Japan and Germany. Germany's 23%.
So this is always interesting. I mean, Japan, Germany, certainly Germany, high wage country, high tax country, seems to be very good at making stuff. And Angela Merkel not known for being a climate skeptic.
No, they've embraced climate change. So the idea that Michael McCormack was alluding to was that if you were to reduce your emissions, this would harm your manufacturing sector.
So if Australia finally did something on climate change, manufacturing might shrink even further.
That's exactly right.
All right.
So why don't we now have a look at how much since 2005 emissions have changed,
right?
Excluding LULUCF.
Oh, we'll come to LULUCF in a minute, but so the orange bars here are emission reductions in these countries, emission reductions from
2005.
From 2005. So
now, when I say emission reduction, there's one that didn't reduce emissions.
Hang on, this one's gone up.
Yeah, so Australia is the only one that saw its emissions rise. So since 2005, our emissions have actually gone up by 6%.
And to be clear, we're talking about emissions here from burning fossil fuels, from energy, from industry, and from transport.
Yep,
right,
exactly right.
So Australia's emissions up, and we've got a tiny manufacturing sector.
Whereas all of these other countries, which have far larger manufacturing sectors, they've all seen emissions fall.
I'm confused. I was sure that Australia was leading the world, and I was sure that no other country was actually doing anything. They were just talking a big game.
Well, that's what the government would like you to believe.
Well, thank you, Mr. McCormack.
Exactly right, and that's what he's alluding to. But what we can see is that large manufacturing sectors are totally consistent with lower emissions.
So renewables in Germany not only didn't ruin the weekend, they haven't even ruined manufacturing.
Not at all. Japan, Italy, even the UK with a massive 33% drop still has a much larger manufacturing sector than Australia.
Wow. So it's as if he's talking complete nonsense.
That's exactly right.
Oh, well, let's see what he says next.
All well and good for other countries in the world to have these outcomes.
All well and good for other countries to have these outcomes. Does these outcomes mean do something about climate change?
They do. Look, clearly from this graph, they are doing something about climate change.
Well, it's all well and good for their emissions. It also seems to be all well and good
for their economies,
for their
manufacturing
sector. Wow. I wonder if he has seen any of this data.
Wow.
Well, let's keep listening.
These determinations, that's for them to decide. We will decide what's best for Australia in Australia's national.
Well, that sounds a bit Howard-esque, doesn't it?
It
We
does.
will decide what's best for Australia.
That's right, yeah. So we will decide the emissions and the way in which they come.
We will decide to keep doing nothing about climate change, just like we decided to goad the car industry into leaving our shores, costing hundreds of thousands of jobs just a few years ago.
Reducing our manufacturing sector.
Slashing our manufacturing sector. Okay.
And already our emissions are at record lows.
Record lows.
Record lows.
Ooh.
Well, let's be clear. What the Deputy Prime Minister is talking about here is when you include offsets, when you include accounting tricks, when you include everything that's got nothing to do with burning fossil fuels, we claim that our emissions have fallen because trees grew after the drought broke, and all sorts of sort of accounting tricks in what's called the land sector. Now, to be clear, these tricks are kind of legal, but if, and it's a giant if you actually want to transition your economy away from fossil fuels, then you need to see emissions falling in your major parts of the economy. And that's what's happening everywhere else.
Already, we have the highest take-up rate per capita of solar rooftop.
Well, that's true, isn't it, Matt?
Yeah, absolutely. Australians love rooftop solar.
Is that because we subsidised it?
We did. We subsidised it brilliantly at the start.
And then people embraced it because we made it cheap.
Are you saying that subsidies work, Richard?
I'm saying subsidies work, but well, and so is he. All right, so yes, Australia can be proud. We've got a lot of rooftops. We love to build big houses in suburban sprawl. We've got a lot of sun, and we've got a lot of solar panels. So well done. Credit where credit's due.
Clap.
And I'm pleased to say, being from a regional member, and I know my colleagues behind me,
Being from a regional member.
Being from a regional member, yeah.
I think he is a regional member.
I think he is a regional member.
And maybe he's being from a regional electorate. But anyway, let's leave him a slip of the tongue.
Liberal and Nationals, are all from regional areas. Regional Australia is playing the leading role.
Regional Australia is playing the leading role. Well,
in rooftop solar.
Is that true?
Well, not really. So if we look at actually where solar panels, the dwellings where solar panels are, most of them are in cities.
Like where most of the people are.
Yeah, exactly
where most
right.
of the roofs are.
Yeah.
So it would be a bit hard for regional Australia to lead with rooftop solar because they just don't have that many roofs.
Exactly right. So the vast majority of it, about 58% of it, is in major urban areas.
Is he trying to play city versus bush here?
He started, yes.
I think he might be trying to say that people in regional Australia are doing everything and everyone else in the Australia is just kind of riding on the sheep's back or something or other. Let's see where we get to.
In making sure that we lower emissions. Regional Australia is making the leading role in producing energy.
So not only is Australia leading the world in reducing emissions, it's regional Australia that's leading Australia. He's very proud of regional Australia, isn't he?
But this is kind of true in the sense that if you're going to build a power station, you don't build it in the middle of a city, do you?
What about a giant mine?
Well, you don't put them in the middle of cities either.
Why is that, Matt?
Well, because that's where the people are and they don't like living on top of them.
Right.
So absolutely, regional Australia, that's where the power stations are, that's where the mines are.
Right. Well, he's true. He's got that right as well.
In all those outcomes. And so regional Australia has the biggest part to play and say in this, and they will continue to do that.
Well, that's true, but if the G7 nations, which he's still answering that question, if the G7 nations and the rest of the world agrees to buy a lot less coal, then isn't that going to hurt regional areas a lot?
Absolutely. So if they introduce a border tax where our exports are suddenly taxed by the amount of carbon in them, that's going to hurt regional areas as well.
So can Australia stop the G7 and the rest of the world buying less of our coal?
No, they don't have any control over that, Richard.
Can he, as Deputy Prime Minister of Australia, stop this?
No, I can't. I don't think he can pass any legislation that forces other countries to buy our stuff.
And can he stop them introducing a tax on the border for our stuff?
No, that would be entirely the other country's issue.
So let's go back to the question. The question was, are you worried that the rest of the world is promising to buy less coal from regional Australia? And he's saying we're leading Australia in coal and energy production.
You'd think that
they're at risk.
If he was really concerned about regional Australia, he might want to start transitioning them now rather than it being one day they wake up and go, no, we don't want it anymore, and there's sort of mass unemployment.
Well, so he's in New South Wales. So let's give you an example. In the Upper Hunter of New South Wales, it's the most coal mine intensive part of New South Wales. New South Wales is the biggest coal producer in Australia, and Australia is one of the biggest, if not the biggest in some years, coal exporter in the world. So the most coal-intensive region in the most coal-intensive state in one of the most coal-intensive countries in the world is in New South Wales. If all of those countries stop buying coal, isn't that going to be a real problem for regional Australia?
Absolutely, it's going to be a problem. We should be transitioning away from it so that we're not more reliant into the future in coal.
But these people want to build more coal mines and It's kind of like if you worked at Kodak in the 90s, putting your life savings into Kodak shares.
Particularly if you knew ahead of time that digital cameras were coming and that they were going to wipe you out.
Let's hear what the rest of his plan is.
Last questions, guys.
The G7 also agreed to speed up a transition away from unabated coal-fired power. What future does coal-fired power have in Australia if the rest of the world, the developing world, is moving away from it?
So another question here, G7 says they're going to transition away from unabated coal-fired power. What does unabated mean?
Oh, well, so there's this weird thing called carbon capture and storage, and it's a technology that's only 10 years away.
It lives down the road next to the unicorn, doesn't it?
It does actually. So there's this idea that when you've got a coal-fired power station, you're emitting lots of emissions into the atmosphere. Rather than emit them in the atmosphere, let's pump them underground and store them.
You catch them coming out of the chimney and then you pump them under the ground.
And then they're safe under there, they're not in the atmosphere, they're not causing warming.
And when we built coal-fired power stations, did we build them on places that are well suited to pumping carbon dioxide under the ground?
No, we build them close to coal mines.
Right. So has anyone ever done this at a large scale in a big commercial coal-fired power station?
Nowhere. But they've been talking about it for 20 years, Richard. And
I think it's been 10 years away for 20 years.
It has. And they've poured billions of dollars into it.
Oh, well. So
Public billions of dollars.
So the G7 is saying don't build coal-fired power stations unless the unicorn technology exists.
Yep.
We know the unicorn technology doesn't exist. Let's hear what the Deputy Prime Minister's got to say.
2/3 of our energy comes from coal.
Oh, wait a minute. He's definitely wrong on this. He said 2/3 of our energy comes from coal. That's wrong. It's only about 30% of our energy actually comes from coal. But what I think he might mean is that...
So we're decoding it here again?
I think it might mean 2/3 of our electricity comes from coal, which is different to all of our energy. Now, let's have a look. So when we look at all of electricity, it's not 66%, 2/3, it's actually 58%.
Oh, 58, 66, they're all medium-sized-ish numbers.
Roughly right. And so...
He's only the Deputy Prime Minister. He doesn't have anyone to brief him with statistics.
No, this can be very tricky. So what we're going to find throughout this interview is that Michael has a little trouble with some of the numbers, okay? And so what I've decided to give him is the Mick factor, all right?
Little wriggle room.
Which is a bit of a fudge room. So he's out by about 10% here.
Right. So 2/3 of our energy doesn't come from coal, and not even 2/3 of our electricity comes from coal.
And also, if we have a look at our electricity, we've got another graph here.
Right.
This is the proportion coal is of total electricity generation. So right now it's come down to about 58%, just over 60, just under 60%.
So not falling nearly as fast as it is in other countries, but actually heading in the right direction.
Exactly right. So this is certainly, it's not a growing source of electricity, it's a falling source of electricity in the country.
All right, and remember again, the question was about the G7. He's talking about us, but let's see where he goes.
55,000 people are employed in the coal industry.
Oh, we've got another stat.
Oh no.
I'm sorry.
Do we need the Mick factor?
We need the Mick factor. 55,000 people are not employed in the coal industry.
Oh no. Michael.
There are 49,000 people employed in the coal mines,
Yep.
Which makes up about 0.4% of the labour force.
0.4% of Australia work in coal, so 99.6% of Australians don't work in coal.
Yep.
All right, but well, come on, Michael. Let's see what else you got.
And $66 billion of exports.
Oh, we've got another figure.
Oh no. Let me
Yeah,
guess.
no, he's out again. It's not 66 billion, it's actually 55 billion.
55, 66, you know, they're both
Mick factor.
Yeah, they're both multiples of 11.
That's very true.
But actually, this idea of exports, I mean, really, we need to explain what's coming up, because the idea that we export a lot of coal, everyone knows that. Australia exports in some years the most, in other years the second most coal of any other country in the world. Australia's got a bigger share of the world traded coal market than Saudi Arabia has in oil. So there's no doubt we're big in coal. But this idea that because we sell a lot of coal, we can afford to do other things, well, we'll come to this in a minute, but listen carefully to what the Deputy Prime Minister thinks.
It pays for a lot of hospitals, pays for a lot of schools, pays for a lot of barista machines that produces the coffee that inner city types sit around and drink and talk about the death of coal.
Oh, inner city types.
Inner city, this is...
Sitting around their coffee machine. I like the guy cracking up in the background.
Yeah.
He's having a great time.
That's exactly right.
So what's going on here, Matt?
Well, he seems to be saying that basically our coal exports buy our coffee machines.
Do you have a coffee machine?
I don't have a coffee machine.
Were you to buy one, would you pay for it with coal?
I wouldn't. I find coal is not a particularly good means of exchange. Like when I rock up to the shop with a big lump of coal, they don't tend to accept it.
All right, so you might not pay for your coffee machine with coal, but maybe Australia pays for Australia's coffee machines with coal. Is that how it works?
Well, I think what he's trying to say, and again, we're trying to decode here,
You're very kind.
is that export dollars somehow pay for stuff in Australia.
Right, so a privately owned, foreign-owned usually in the mining industry, a foreign-owned mining company mines some coal in Australia,
Yep.
sells the coal to Japan or Korea or China, and the Japanese or Koreans or Chinese pay Glencore or some other foreign company for the coal. So when Glencore or a coal company gets the check for their coal, do they go buy coffee machines for us? Is that how it works?
That seems to be what he's alluding, but that's the exact opposite of what happened. Mind you,
Are you talking economics?
I am. Mind you, it is possible that coal is used, the profits from coal is used to buy coffee machines.
How so?
Well, the foreign owners of our rich foreign owners probably buy coffee machines and put it in their mansions overseas.
Lucky for them.
But not so much in Australia.
All right, so we really need to clear something up. Yes, Australia is a big exporter of coal, but the money that Australia gets for exports is a very abstract concept. If I set up a jacket company and I export jackets, I get to keep the money. If Matt sets up a YouTube channel and people from overseas pay him to do it, Matt keeps the money. So when someone exports something, sure, we count that. The national accounts, the Australian Bureau of Statistics keep track of all this stuff, but it's the person who sells the coal that gets the money for the coal.
And it's accounted for in exactly the same way or a similar way if you sold those jackets to Australians. You get to keep the money if you buy it from Australia.
What, like capitalism?
Exactly right. So exports aren't anything special. They're just selling to people overseas rather than selling to people in Australia.
So let's stick with this because it's an important point. He's suggesting that because we sell a lot of coal, see, the we is the problem. Because someone who owns a coal mine sells a lot of coal, other people can afford to buy a coffee machine. Does that mean that if we want to buy more coffee machines, they would have to mine more coal?
Well, exactly right. So if we want more stuff, then presumably more coal has to be sold.
Where does this conversation take place? Who tells the coal miners how many coffee machines we're planning to buy?
Maybe they've got like one of those big thermometer things with the thing where, suddenly, we're buying more stuff. The coal mine, quickly. We've got to dig more coal out in order to be able to afford it.
Right, so just to be crystal clear, there is absolutely no relationship at all between how much coal a coal mine sells and how much coffee someone who lives in the inner city or the outer suburbs or anywhere else. Do they drink coffee in regional Australia?
They do.
But they fund their own coffee machines with their own coal.
I don't know.
Oh, we're through the looking glass, people.
Well, as the New South Wales Governor said, as the federal governor said, and as other governments have also said, coal has a part to play for many more years to come.
Oh, this is the key line. Coal has a part to play for many more years to come. It's one of those lines that's perfectly true and perfectly meaningless.
Yep. Perfect political answer.
Wonderful political answer. So you hear this, gas has an important role to play for decades to come. Yep, that role is to decline. That role is to decline. It's meaningless. No one's talking about shutting down coal-fired power stations in one go tomorrow. No one's talking about shutting down mining coal tomorrow. So what's going to happen when the rest of the world buys less of our stuff, when the rest of the world refuses to import our stuff if it's too dirty? What's going to happen is that coal is going to continue to decline, gas is going to continue to decline, and yeah, maybe in 10, 20 years' time, there'll still be some coal and gas getting burnt. It's going to be trivial. So yeah, these phrases of has an important role to play for years to come, yep, it does, but the main importance is that role is shrinking.
And the difference here is that while it might have an important role, that doesn't mean that we should be investing more money and growing the industry now.
Exactly. So the role is to decline. If we double down on this now, it's like doubling down on Kodak in the 90s. Okay, so that's Michael McCormack. That's his press conference. But what's really important is to understand that this is not an isolated incident. This is not an accident. And all this folksy stuff and all this bush versus the city stuff is in no way an accident. There is a coherent, systematic strategy by the National Party to emphasise the importance of coal and trivialise the attitudes, the preferences, and indeed the jobs of people who work in cities. I know you understand what we've said today, but I'm a bit worried about your friends. And I don't think Mick Mack wants people to understand what he's doing. So if you want people to understand, if you want people to be able to see through this nonsense, please share the video, subscribe to the video, and hit the bell so you get notified when we get new videos up. We make all of our content free, but it's not free to make. If you can, please donate to our end of financial year appeal. Every dollar you donate to the Australia Institute Research Fund between now and the 30th of June will be matched dollar for dollar by 2 generous donors until we reach our goal of $70,000. It's tax deductible and someone's going to match it.